Frank Lentini was a circus performer in the early 1900s who was born with a parasitic twin. This resulted in him having 3 legs, 4 feet, 16 toes, and yes, 2 sets of functioning genitals. He married, had 4 kids, and lived to the age of 78. Here's a clip of Admiral Jeremiah Denton blinking the word torture in Morse code while he was held captive in the Vietnam War. He was being filmed for Vietnamese propaganda, but U.S. naval intelligence was able to decipher his message. In 1979, gold miners in Alaska stumbled upon this perfectly preserved steppe bison that's right around 50,000 years old. It was so incredibly intact that researchers decided to take a chunk of muscle from its neck and cook it into a meal. It was described as tough like beef jerky, but quite delicious aside from the muddy aftertaste. Ty Pennington nearly died after ignoring what he thought was just a sore throat for over a month. In 2023, the infection turned out to be a massive throat abscess that became so severe it started blocking his airway, leaving him struggling to breathe. Pennington was rushed to the ICU, intubated, and flown to another hospital for emergency surgery. He later said doctors told him he easily could have died if he waited any longer to get treatment. In the early days of cars, drivers who killed pedestrians were often blamed for what newspapers called motor killings. But as deaths began to rise in the 1920s, automobile companies pushed the term jaywalker to shift blame onto pedestrians, helping normalize the idea that people hit by cars were at fault for their own deaths. The Cave Creek disaster occurred in 1995 at Paparoa National Park in New Zealand, when 17 people crowded onto a newly built viewing platform overlooking Cave Creek on a field trip. The structure suddenly tore away from the cliffside and collapsed forward, sending the group plunging nearly 40 meters onto the rocks below. 14 people were killed, most of them university students, while the survivors suffered devastating injuries. Investigators later discovered the platform had been catastrophically poorly built, with several missing bolts and critical structural flaws. However, no individual was ever criminally convicted over the disaster. In 1974, a photographer was snapping photos of 2 amateur street mimes in Central Park. 35 years later, he discovered that one of them was actor Robin Williams before he became famous. A Reddit user from California was gaming in his room when a stray bullet went through his window and struck him in the head. But he was miraculously saved by his Razer headset, which prevented the bullet from piercing his skull. Diana Ross, who sang "Ain't No Mountain High Enough," lost her husband in a mountain climbing accident. In 1983, a man confessed to the murder of his wife after a female skull was found in a peat bog near his home. He was convicted of her 1961 murder solely based on this confession. But it turned out that the skull actually belonged to a woman who had died nearly 1,800 years earlier. After this discovery, the man withdrew his confession but was convicted anyway. When James Mack's ex-girlfriend Sarah filed a restraining order on him, he realized he had to do something extreme to win her back. So he got 37 plastic surgeries and a vocal cord operation to completely change his identity. But a few weeks after meeting her, he made a comment about when they first started dating, and she called police immediately to have him arrested. In Canada, it's illegal to pretend to practice witchcraft. However, it's perfectly legal to practice witchcraft. The worldwide sale of Coke earns more than Microsoft, McDonald's, and Kellogg's combined. In 1997, a Danish woman was arrested in New York City for leaving her baby outside in a stroller while she was dining in a restaurant. But since leaving your baby out is common practice in Denmark, she sued the city and was awarded $66,000. In 2016, an Indonesian pop star died on stage after she was bitten by the king cobra she was dancing with. She kept performing for 45 minutes before succumbing to the snake's venom. A German shepherd named Tolero stayed next to the body of his owner for 23 days after he had died in a snowstorm. He prevented animals from attacking the body and tried to keep his owner warm by sleeping by his side. In 1937, a gas leak in the basement of a school in Texas caused a massive explosion that killed 300 children. It was the deadliest school disaster in U.S. history and was so tragic that even Adolf Hitler sent his condolences. This incredibly detailed sculpture was created by Antonio Caradini in 1752. It's a depiction of his mother wearing a weightless veil and was carved completely from a block of marble. The incredible dental work on this 4,000-year-old Egyptian mummy shows how advanced they were in the field of dentistry. These taxidermied frogs were found inside of an old French mansion that had been sealed for more than 100 years. It took Italian archaeologist Italo Gismondi 36 years to build this insanely accurate scale model of ancient Rome. This is a photo of archaeologists uncovering a mosaic in Turkey that remained untouched for 2,000 years. These handprints can be found on the walls of Pedikir Cave in Indonesia. This artwork is estimated to be roughly 40,000 years old. This was the moment panic spread through a packed subway train after a man suddenly began spraying an unknown substance into the crowded carriage. As the mist spread through the enclosed train car, confused passengers started covering their faces and frantically trying to move away. Though some reports called it an irritant spray, many online viewers speculated that it may have instead been some kind of prank fart spray. The incident reportedly happened aboard a subway train in Guangzhou, China. The man involved was soon detained by authorities after the incident, though his motive remains unclear. This was the moment a German shepherd found himself dangling off the edge of a high apartment balcony after laying too close to the edge and slipping underneath the metal railing. Trapped several stories above the ground, the terrified dog desperately tried to hold himself up using only his front paws as his back legs hung helplessly in the air. With nothing to grip onto to pull himself back up, the dog could do nothing but hang on for dear life. If he lost his grip, the fall could have easily killed him or left him severely injured. But suddenly, the exhausted dog noticed his owner becoming aware of the situation and immediately started wagging his tail. Luckily, the woman rushed over and pulled him to safety just moments before the dog became too tired to hang on. This eerie burial suit from China's Liao dynasty was made between the 10th and 11th centuries, using woven silver wire, a bronze mask, and a metal crown to encase the dead. Elite members of the dynasty were sometimes buried in elaborate metal suits like this because it was believed they could help preserve the body and protect the soul in the afterlife. A 700-year-old statue of the Hindu god Ganesha sits perched on top of Indonesia's active Mount Bromo volcano, where it has overlooked smoke, ash, and eruptions for centuries as part of a sacred ancient site used by local Tenggerese worshippers. In 2024, researchers using LiDAR scans in Ecuador's Upano Valley revealed the hidden remains of a massive 2,500-year-old civilization buried beneath the Amazon rainforest, including huge networks of roads, plazas, homes, and agricultural structures that had remained completely concealed under dense jungle for centuries. Archaeologists say the site is so enormous that only a small portion has been studied so far, and future excavations could uncover far more about the lost civilization and how millions of people may have once lived deep within the Amazon. Queen Elizabeth had two first cousins named Nerissa and Catherine Lyon who were severely disabled. Nerissa was publicly pronounced dead in 1940, while her sister Catherine was said to have died in 1961. But it was later revealed that they were actually tucked away in a mental asylum without any visits from the royal family until their actual deaths in 1986 and 2014. The US military buys a prank fart spray called liquid ass to train and prepare medics for the stench of the battlefield. This is a 1969 photo of Roman Polanski kneeling next to the door where the word pig is written in his wife Sharon Tate's blood. While Polanski was working on a film in Europe, Tate was stabbed 16 times by members of the Manson family when she was 8.5 months pregnant. Polanski has said that the murders changed him forever and that not being there is his greatest life regret. 5 members of the Trinidad family died when Alvin Hubbard crashed into the family minivan, leaving Mother Mary Rose as the only survivor. Alvin claimed the crash was caused by a coughing fit and he only received 1 year probation since prosecutors couldn't find any evidence of reckless conduct. After the sentencing, Mary Rose said it was as if her family was killed all over again. There's a Mickey Mouse comic strip from 1930 in which Minnie leaves Mickey for another mouse. In response, Mickey proceeds to attempt suicide various ways. On Friday the 13th in October 1972, a plane carrying 45 people crashed into the Andes Mountains. Faced with radio reports that the search for them had been abandoned, the survivors had to resort to eating their friends. 16 remaining survivors were finally rescued 72 days after the initial crash. In the year 2000, Rick Norsegian went to a garage sale looking for a barber chair but ended up purchasing 2 boxes of old photos for $45. 4 years later, he discovered that the boxes contained 65 glass plate negatives from famous photographer Ansel Adams, worth right around $200 million. The crew of this ship raised its anchor, only to realize it was hooked on an unexploded torpedo. After Martin Luther King was killed in 1968, his funeral was held at Morehouse College in Atlanta. A small group of current students were chosen to be ushers at his funeral, and one of them was Samuel L. Jackson. Violet Jessop was a ship nurse in the early 1900s who couldn't seem to avoid disaster. She was on the Titanic when it sank, the Britannic when it was struck by a torpedo, and the Olympic when it collided with another ship. Violet managed to survive all three. Rock legend Dave Grohl has tried to live as frugally as possible after watching his mother suffer a stroke while filing her taxes. Famous philosopher Kurt Gödel had an obsessive fear of being poisoned, so he only ate food cooked by his wife. When his wife went to the hospital for an extended stay, Gödel stopped eating completely and promptly starved to death. If you're ever dared to swim in a tank that looks like this, say no. Aeration tanks have a much lower density than water and therefore very little buoyancy. This means if you fall into one, you will certainly drown. Ashley Martinson was abused by several of her mother's boyfriends throughout her childhood. The day after her 17th birthday, she killed her stepfather with a shotgun before stabbing her mother 30 times to death. She was sentenced to 23 years in prison, but says she feels safer and happier now than she ever did at home. In 2013, 16-year-old Ethan Couch killed 4 people while drunk driving, but he initially wasn't sentenced to any jail time since his attorney argued that he suffered from affluenza, a mental illness caused by growing up with too much money. In ancient Sparta, only 2 groups of people could have their names inscribed on their tombstones: men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth. In 1994, Los Angeles police arrested a man dressed as the Grim Reaper carrying a scythe. He was reported by various nursing homes after staring through patients' windows while wearing the costume. In the year 2000, the charred remains of Mary Lou Morris were found in her burned-out car in Houston, Texas. Only 4 days later, the body of Mary McGinnis Morris was found in her burned-out car in Houston, Texas. Police believe that a hitman killed the wrong Mary Morris and tried to fix it. In 1987, a British woman purchased a ring from a flea market for $5, thinking it was simply a nice-looking artificial stone. But 33 years later, she discovered that it was actually a genuine 26-carat diamond ring worth $960,000. During the Crimean War over 160 years ago, a French and Russian soldier fired at each other and their bullets miraculously collided. The series Breaking Bad has 62 episodes in total. The 62nd element on the periodic table is samarium, a substance typically used to treat lung cancer. One of the most renowned vasectomy doctors in all of Texas is named Dr. Dick Chop. Packers fan Jim Becker regularly donated blood in order to afford tickets for games. Years later, he found out that he had a potentially deadly disease that could only be prevented through giving blood. So without even knowing it, he was saving his own life by donating blood the entire time. In 2003, Kenneth Maxwell called 911 to report a house fire that he came across while driving home from work. But his voice suddenly cut off during the call, and when firemen arrived at the scene, Kenneth was found shot dead in his car. It turned out the fire was created to cover up a double homicide, and the killer saw Kenneth making the call. Morticians often use these spiky contacts to keep the eyes of the dead closed during funeral viewings. During World War II, one of the first Japanese cities that the US planned on nuking was its former capital, Kyoto. The only reason it wasn't bombed was because US Secretary of War Henry Stimson spent his honeymoon there and thought it was a nice place. So instead of Kyoto, they went with Nagasaki. Staying at an Airbnb in Virginia in July of 2024, Joe Bartolozzi revealed that he was bitten by a Lone Star tick, a species linked to alpha-gal syndrome, a bizarre condition that can suddenly make people severely allergic to red meat after a single tick bite. Joe said he began experiencing symptoms consistent with the condition, meaning foods he had eaten his entire life could now potentially trigger hives, vomiting, breathing problems, or even anaphylactic shock hours after eating them. He later said the symptoms eventually improved, though some victims remain allergic to meat for years or even permanently. In 2004, 24-year-old American college student David Snedon vanished while hiking alone through China's Tiger Leaping Gorge in Yunnan province and was initially presumed dead after search teams found no trace of him. But years later, multiple defectors and South Korean intelligence sources claimed Snedon had actually been abducted by North Korea and forced to work as an English tutor for younger Kim Jong-un. North Korea denied the allegations, and Snedon's disappearance remains officially unsolved. Modeled after Harry Potter's first broom, Mattel's battery-operated Nimbus 2000 allowed kids to ride around their house like a wizard. But it was quickly pulled from shelves in 2001 after enough parents complained about the fact that it vibrated. In London in the 1930s, many parents would keep their babies in cages outside of their windowsill. This made sure they got enough air and sunshine living in a tall apartment building, but the product quickly fell out of style. A toy called Rad, Repeat, and Tarzan was released by Disney in 1999, but it was later recalled by Mattel when people pointed out that its arm movement made it look like it was fapping. In 1998, public schools from across America gave out these anti-drug pencils that read "Too cool to do drugs." But once students sharpened them down enough, they had quite the opposite message. Serial killer and cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer was brutally killed in prison when another inmate beat him to death with a metal bar. The killer later revealed that he did it because he was sick of Jeffrey making the prison food look like severed limbs to tease the other inmates. Dutch passenger Cor Pan jokingly made this post just months after Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 went missing. Little did he know his own flight would meet a similar fate, as MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, killing everyone on board. Hannibal of Carthage was famous for intimidating his Roman enemies through the use of war elephants. But the Romans eventually learned that elephants are afraid of squealing pigs, so they would lather pigs in tar and set them on fire, sending the enemy elephants fleeing in horror. This is where the term war pigs originated from. 25 years after the unsolved murder of Nicole van den Herk, her stepbrother falsely confessed to killing her. He did this so that the body would be exhumed for DNA testing, which led to the prosecution of her true killer. In Queensland, Australia, it's illegal to own a pet rabbit unless you can prove that you're a magician. A kidnapped teenager didn't realize that he was kidnapped until 13 years after it happened. He was applying to college when he noticed his social security number didn't line up with his name. Last year, police from Vietnam seized 345,000 used condoms that were cleaned and sold as new. In 2015, a Louisiana man was arrested for drunkenly riding his horse on a highway. He said his horse knew the way home, and the sheriff concluded that it didn't constitute a DUI. In 2012, a beachcomber in Canada came across an old Harley Davidson that washed ashore. Turns out the bike was lost in the 2011 Japanese tsunami and managed to float all the way across the Pacific. Author Lois Duncan wrote many popular crime and suspense novels throughout the 70s and 80s, but she essentially stopped writing completely when her own daughter became the victim of an unsolved murder in 1989. In 2020, a fan drove 3 hours to deliver a much-needed dose of insulin to rapper Boozy Badass. She refused to accept any payment other than a photo with him. But on her way home, she stopped at a gas station, bought a scratch-off ticket, and won 10 grand. In 2004, grandmother Dorothy Fletcher suddenly suffered a heart attack on her flight to Florida. When the stewardess asked if there was a doctor on board, 15 people stood up. They were on their way to a cardiology conference. The Antwerp diamond heist in 2003 was one of the biggest robberies in history. A Belgian man stole $100 million in diamonds after bypassing 10 levels of high security. He would have gotten away with it, but was convicted via DNA evidence on a salami sandwich that he'd left near the crime scene. Missouri man David Berry Jr. was convicted after killing hundreds of wild deer for fun. As part of his punishment, he was forced to watch the movie Bambi once a month for the entirety of his one-year sentence. During the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, the Russians drilled a small mouse hole into an anti-doping lab. Through this hole, they exchanged clean urine samples for those who would have tested positive for PEDs. Over 100 dirty samples were smuggled out by a Russian agent pretending to be a sewer engineer. When El Chapo wanted to eat at a restaurant, his team of gunmen would lock down the entire building. They would then demand everyone's phones, promising that they would be returned at the end of the evening. Chapo would then come in and feast, return all the phones, pay everyone's tabs, and head off into the night. One of Russia's most popular TV shows in the 90s challenged contestants to steal a car. If they could evade police for more than 35 minutes, they got to keep it. In 2015, a Canadian man was arrested after tying 100 balloons to a garden chair and flying over the city of Calgary. Donald Harvey was a nurse and serial killer who killed 37 of his victims with cyanide. He was only caught when one of his victims' coroners had the rare genetic ability to smell cyanide. Of all the atrocities committed during World War II, few compare to the gruesome experiments performed by Japanese Unit 731. It was a biological warfare research unit that conducted on unwitting subjects who were often prisoners of war. Some of the earlier, more mild experiments involved injecting pathogens such as anthrax and cholera into subjects. But as the war intensified, their trials became increasingly extreme. For example, they left people in the freezing cold and blew people's legs off with grenades to see how long it would take them to die. In one experiment, scientists peeled the skin off of living people to learn how much skin you could peel off before killing someone. At least 3,000 subjects were experimented on, and all of them died. And perhaps worst of all, the researchers of Unit 731 were granted immunity by the US in exchange for the horrific data they gathered. In 1989, the Buffalo Sabres goalie had his neck sliced by another player's skate, which severed his carotid artery. It resulted in so much blood loss that 11 fans fainted, 2 had heart attacks, and 3 players uked on the ice. His life was saved by the team trainer, who luckily served in the Vietnam War as a combat medic. When he was executed in 1793, King Louis XVI was so fat for the guillotine that it took 2 attempts to fully cut through. About 10,000 Facebook users die every day. Eventually, the number of dead profiles will outnumber the living ones, and Facebook will become a digital graveyard. This is what a Japanese execution chamber looks like, where convicts are killed by long drop hanging through a trap door. In Japan, prisoners on death row aren't told when they'll be executed until 1 hour before it happens. In 2012, archaeologists in Central Asia found a few fossilized bone fragments estimated to be over 90,000 years old. Genomic sequencing later revealed that they belong to a human that's completely unique from any specimen ever recorded. Her parents were 2 completely different species of human, her mother a Neanderthal and her father a Denisovan. Here's an aerial photograph of an uncontacted tribe in the Amazon rainforest ready to go to battle against a helicopter. This pic shows a Queen's Guard receiving some water outside the Buckingham Palace due to extreme heat. This is a rare and quite juicy New York strip. And finally, we have some colorized footage of the last known Tasmanian tiger Benjamin at the Hobart Zoo in 1936. The species officially went extinct when Benjamin was locked outside of his sleeping quarters on a cold Tasmanian night and froze to death. 50% of panda births result in twins, but panda moms almost always abandon one of them. Zookeepers must switch the cubs every few hours to trick the mother into caring for both. Manatees have 2 nipples, 1 in each of their armpits. There's a species of hawk that deliberately spreads wildfires to catch prey. They carry burning twigs in their talons and drop them into new areas so they can feast on all of the animals running away from the blaze. Some squid have a donut-shaped brain with an esophagus that passes through it. This means if they eat something too big, they can get brain damage. Ants will refuse medical help from their colony if they know they're fatally wounded. Rather than waste the colony's resources, the ant will flail its legs to tell the other ants to let it die. After a failed circumcision led to a sex reassignment surgery, David Reimer was raised as a girl. Once he found out that he was in fact not a girl, Reimer started living as a male at the age of 15. But after years of suffering from severe depression and confusion, Reimer took the age of 38. Many shelters won't allow black cats to be adopted around Halloween time, out of fear that they might be tortured or sacrificed. In many cities across the US, people on the sex offender registry have to keep their outdoor lights off during Halloween. This is a 1948 photo of a Chicago mother hiding her face in shame after putting her children up for sale. 2 of them were sold to an abusive family for $2 apiece so that their mother could afford rent. Their new father would often tie them up in a barn and force them to work long hours, often referring to them as slaves. The servant of Philon was an ancient Greek humanoid robot that was designed to mix and pour wine whenever a cup was placed in its hand. Built in 3rd century BC, the statue was far ahead of its time, as many historians consider it to be the first robot ever built. This insanely well-preserved pair of Levi's jeans was left in a California gold mine in 1879 until it was rediscovered 136 years later. Atlit Yam is a 9,000-year-old submerged Neolithic village off the coast of Israel. Underwater excavations have uncovered houses, a well, and skeletons that have revealed the oldest known cases of tuberculosis. Ferdinand Cheval was a French mailman who spent 33 years building a palace out of rocks he collected along his mailing route. Finished in 1912, the ideal palace is considered to be one of the most extraordinary examples of naive art architecture in the world. Alan Lee Davis was convicted of 3 counts of murder after killing a pregnant woman and her 2 daughters in 1982. When he was executed in 1999, it took 3 runs of the electric chair to kill him. Due to the botched execution, he remains the last person to be executed by electric chair in the state of Florida. This 1985 photo was taken on board Japanese Airlines Flight 123 just minutes before the plane crashed into a mountainside. There were 520 fatalities, including everyone shown in this photo. In 2017, Las Vegas police arrested Shane Schindler, the prime suspect in the sledgehammer murders of 2 homeless men. Police set up a sting in which they disguised the mannequin as a homeless man and left it on the street. This is a photo of Schindler bashing the mannequin with a sledgehammer, thus proving he was the killer. In 2001, Ashton Kutcher had a girlfriend who was murdered by a serial killer after being stabbed 35 times in her own home. Kutcher would end up testifying in the trial of the Hollywood Ripper, who would later confess to murdering at least 10 women over a 15-year span. Author of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, lost her virginity on top of her mother's grave. She also kept her dead husband's heart and carried it around for 30 years until her own death. According to the FBI, if you're murdered in the United States, there's only about a 40% chance that your killer will be found and punished. In 2009, a Russian man went to the doctor suspecting that there was something wrong with his lungs. Initially, doctors thought they were dealing with a tumor, but it ended up being something they'd never seen before. It turned out that years ago, the man accidentally inhaled the seed of a fir tree and it started growing inside of him.